So, you want to know what on earth is happening? Then sit back and listen as this guy next door speaks. But first, here's a song to get us started.
I am anti-government in any form because I do not like anyone telling me how to live but me.
Hey, this the sound of freedom. Can't join them, then beat them. You can't follow them, then lead them. They said I never make it, but I didn't believe them. Yeah, I'm still breathing. I'm here and I'm not leaving. Even if the ground crumbles and the sky falls, I will never give up. I just give it my all. Even if the ground crumbles and the sky falls, I will never give up. I just give it my all. This is what I live for. This is what I die for. This is what most people look up to the sky for. But I'm more intelligent than that. Plus I've been to hell and back, so I never need a man to lead me to where heaven's at. It's right here inside of me. I don't try to be. I am a rhyming anomaly. I don't gotta use a pen. I tune into the frequency and channel my rhymes. Only human, but as you can see, a man is divine. Yeah, like every human being. Check out the view I'm seeing. A future world where ain't no struggling for you and me and everybody else. A world full of plenty wealth and healthy people who are able to depend on self. Now no longer are we doing bad. That's the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had. And that dream lives on. If you see in the vision, then help me sing this song. Hey, this the sound of freedom. Can't join them, then beat them. You can't follow them, then lead them. They said I never make it, but I didn't believe them. Yeah, I'm still breathing. I'm here and I'm not leaving. Even if the ground crumbles and the sky falls, I will never give up. I just give it my all. Even if the ground crumbles and the sky falls, I will never give up. I just give it my all. This is my word and my balls. Y'all heard my call. Now I got you looking at me with your third eyeball. Check the visual. For those of you who thought I was dispensable, you ought to know by now that diesel energy's invincible. I've been this way since I came to the physical. I built myself by going against the grain like a crystal skull. It gets difficult, but I ain't never quitting. My return was biblical. They said that it was written. I'm no longer a victim. My enemies are forgiven. I do my own bidding. By the will of self, I'm driven. I'm living, loving every moment, manifesting destiny. Not giving up or folding with a 2 and 7 dealt to me. Every hand's a winning hand if you know how to play it right. How could I be scared of dying if I ain't afraid of life? Hold on, man, I think I better say it twice. How could I be scared of dying if I ain't afraid of life? Hey, this the sound of freedom. Can't join them, then beat them. You can't follow them, then lead them. They said I never make it, but I didn't believe them. Yeah, I'm still breathing. I'm here and I'm not leaving. Even if the ground crumbles and the sky falls, I will never give up. I just give it my all. Even if the ground crumbles and the sky falls, I will never give up. I just give it my all. Yeah, diesel automatic. V-City on the beat. You know what we do. Get big on it. Ooh. This is the sound of freedom. We never give up. We just give it all.
And that was Diesel Automatic with The Sound of Freedom. And I am Ivan from Phoenix, and this is Guy Next Door Speaks. Today is Monday, August 24, 2015, and this is episode number 9. And today I have another special guest. This time we'll be speaking with Mark Devlin out of the UK. And instead of reading all the long bios and whatnot, you can just go online and type in markdevlin.co.uk. And Mark Devlin's a DJ out of the UK who woke up a few years ago and started putting out information using music and lectures and presentations and whatnot. And I think he's in the middle of writing a book right now too. So let's go ahead and welcome him to the show. We have Mark Devlin. Mark, how you doing?
Hey, Ivan. Good to talk to you again, brother.
Hey. Good to finally talk to you again. We met actually at the Free Your Mind conference earlier this year, and it was good to see you there.
Well, yeah, it's good to meet you too, and I appreciate the lift back to the station.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I shuttled you around a little bit.
And the pickup from Philly as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that was kind of weird, huh? It kind of, we were led to believe that the conference was just outside of Phoenix, just, stone throw away, from Philly. And next thing you know, it's like, a 45-minute drive up there. But it was a nice area. It was good up there. Nice, plenty of trees and open space and whatnot. So that was good. And I think next year the conference is at the same place. Are you going to try and attend this time again?
Actually, about 3 days ago, I booked my flights. I'm flying to New York because it's a hell of a lot cheaper than flying to Philly. and then I get a Greyhound bus down to Philly. So I am going to be there. I'm not sure if Bob and John are going to ask me to speak again. I've offered to speak. I'd be very happy to do another talk. But even if they don't, either way, I'm going to be there as a punter, just absorbing it. And I do hope to have copies of my book available by then. So I'm looking to get a merchandise table and try and punt out a few copies of the book.
Okay, well, we'll get into the book here in a few minutes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure at the conference, it might even be better for you if maybe you don't speak this time, that way you can just be more, I guess, stress or worry-free and take in all the rest of the speakers and mingle and interact. And if you do get a table, spend plenty of time there socializing and spreading your information there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see how it pans out anyway.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, then. So, well, Mark, go ahead and give us a little bit of who you are, where you're from, and why I would have you on this show, because this basically goes out to whoever finds this show, either on my website, freeyourmindaz.com, or on Podomatic, or through my meetup groups. I tend to send this out on emails or whatnot. So if for someone who's never heard of Mark Devlin, why the heck do I have you on my show, Mark?
I'll give you the potted version because we'll be here for quite a long time otherwise if I give you my life story. So this is the very abridged version. In a nutshell, I'm a radio and club DJ out of the UK. I have been for the last 25 years. I've been a music writer as well, used to write for music magazines. I wrote one book 8 years ago called Tales from the Flip Side, and this was before I woke up, so it's not what you'd call a conscious kind of read. It was a collection of anecdotes from my many years of traveling around as a DJ, just funny stories of stuff that happened to me. And I woke up, you would say, underwent a conscious awakening in 2010. And it was the tail end of quite a long process of having done reading and researching and many years of asking the big questions, reflecting and musing on the big questions in life. Why are we here? What are we? What is here anyway? What's it all about? I'd always been someone that had thought about those things, but never really came up with any answers. And in 2010, something just happened, a process occurred whereby I woke up to great truths and a lot of the answers came to me, and I came to understand a lot of the great kind of mysteries of the universe. Not to say that I know everything there is to know, very far from it, but a lot of stuff just started to make sense. And it set me off on a very different path. And I'm sure many people listening to this can relate to it. It's been a very gradual, progressive sort of process over the last 5 years. And I'm just learning new stuff every day, and I feel that I'm raising my consciousness as I do. I'm just coming to more understandings about these great questions in life. And things got to the point where I decided that I had to start participating in the process of communicating this information to other people. You've heard the phrase with great... what is it? With great
power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. That's the phrase I was thinking of. With great power comes great responsibility. That's like a superhero comic book kind of phrase. Yeah. Exactly. And I came to understand that when you do gain this understanding of great truths, you do take on an obligation to communicate those to other people, especially when you realize the plight that humanity is currently facing at the hands of this insidious control system that we currently have, which is hell-bent on our destruction and our enslavement, our spiritual, mental and physical enslavement. When you realize that's going on and you understand the methods that they're using, you do take on a responsibility to communicate to others as widely as possible what you yourself have come to understand. And so that set me off on the path of just figuring out what I could do, what my contribution could be, how I could put my skills to use. And so I started doing my podcast series, Good Vibrations, which is quite similar to this one. It's conversation based with a lot of interesting researchers and filmmakers and scholars and such. And it's all kinds of alternative conversations that just make people think and get people reflecting and hopefully stir them into some sort of action as well. And I also started putting together my Sound of Freedom conscious music podcast, which is bringing together a whole bunch of tracks from artists who are articulating all this stuff that we hear about in these conversations and all this stuff that's on people's minds that have woken up in these times. It's put to music by so many artists out there. And you might not realize how much of this great stuff there is when you scratch beneath the surface, because it's not stuff that you hear on the radio or see on MTV or hear in the club. But there's some fantastic music being made by some very awakened, conscious artists. So I realized that a job I could do pretty well was to bring all this stuff together into a podcast every fortnight and present it as a showcase for people. And I also went back to previous decades and unearthed a whole load of music that was being made in the 1960s, 70s, 80s by artists that are talking about stuff that is happening right now. And you can listen to a record from 1971 or something, and it could have been written yesterday in terms of the stuff that's being put across. So I like to showcase a lot of that older stuff as well. And I've started doing public talks on my pet subject, really, which is the manipulations of the corporate mainstream music industry and how it's used as a method of mass mind control, social engineering, how the A-list mainstream artists are absolutely controlled and puppeteered by the Illuminati corporations at the very top of the tree that run everything. They run every aspect of daily human life. Why would the entertainment industry be any different? So I go out there and talk about the ways in which they use the music industry to unroll their agenda for human enslavement and control. That's pretty much a pet subject of mine, as I say. And I'm organising an event as well in the UK in October. It's an all-day event, bringing together a bunch of speakers. And in the evening, it's going to be a feel-good, uplifting sort of party vibe. We've got some DJs, we've got a couple of street poets, and we've got some live music acts. Very much inspired by the experience that I had at Free Your Mind this year, the Free Your Mind conference. That kind of stirred me into action in terms of trying to put on something similar here in the UK. So that's a very kind of potted version of where I'm at in life, really.
Okay, wow. Yeah, kind of got me tired listening to all that. Man, you're pretty busy.
Yeah, pretty busy, yeah.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So then now you're working on a book right now?
Yep, I am. I've got this book, which I'm looking to put out in the first quarter of next year. I'm calling it Musical Truth. And it's bringing together everything that I've come to understand over the past 5 years about how the music industry is used and all the various facets of what's being done to us. And it's going to be quite a book, I tell you. I've written about...
I know I've heard you talk about that book. You started in one direction, right? Musical Truths, just music and the stuff people don't know about. But now you've kind of learned so much along the way that it's kind of expanded into other areas. So can you kind of just touch on, like, maybe, you know, break it down where you initially started, what you wanted, and then where you were at, and then like now where you're headed with it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I started writing it in September last year, so it's just coming up to the first anniversary. It's been a year of absolutely furious writing and just grabbing any half hour here and 40 minutes there and an hour and a half here to just put some words together. And it's been a real learning process for me as I've gone along. And as you say, it started out with the intent of bringing together all these various explanations of the manipulations and you know how these things work. So it was going to be letting people know about mind-controlled artists, letting people know about the dark occult symbolism and imagery that goes into music videos and stage shows, how the live stage shows at things like the Grammys and the US Super Bowl halftime and the MTV VMA Awards are actually massive occult rituals on a grand scale that harvest the energy of the watching public and help to empower this ritual into being. I was going to break down how that works and the nuts and bolts of that whole scenario. I'm getting into demonic possession. You know, it's pretty dark stuff in here, but it does need to be communicated. It does need to be understood. Nothing's going to change in the world until people take on a deep understanding of what's being done to them. So I'm trying to explain all these different processes. I'm talking about the possible ritual sacrifice of certain high-profile artists. That's going to shock a lot of people to hear that. It's going to repel a lot of people. And I say possible because it's one of those things that's very difficult to prove, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it's going on. So the book was intended to initially get over all these things, and indeed they are all in there. I do break down all these different subject areas. But one thing that occurred to me over the months as I continued the writing process was I gained a much deeper understanding of the concepts of free will consciousness and consenting and contracting, and how this ties in with natural law or universal law, karmic law, consequentialism, cause and effect, whatever label you want to put on it. But we'll call it natural law for the purposes of this conversation. You know, it's the same concept either way, whatever label you put on it. But I came to a very deep understanding of how natural law governs the universe and how we as humans are very much bound by it, whether we understand it or not, whether we like it or not, or whether we choose to accept it or not. It doesn't make a difference either way, it applies. And so you might as well come to a deep understanding of how it works and apply it positively in your life, because nothing is going to get better for humanity until people in very large numbers come to an understanding of how we're bound by the tenets of natural law. And I came to understand how free will consciousness and natural law and consenting actually all ties in to much of what's being done to us via the entertainment industry, and particularly the music industry. And it might seem first off that these different subject areas are wildly disparate and unconnected, but they do actually all fit together. Everything does. Ultimately, everything is connected. And I think it was putting together the chapter on predictive programming that really brought it home to me. People are probably familiar with the concept of predictive programming, but just in a nutshell, that is all about placing a depiction of a real world event which is yet to happen in a work of popular culture. So that could be a music video, it could be a TV show, it could be a cartoon, it could be a Hollywood movie. And the event in question could be a government-sponsored false flag terror event, such as 9/11 or 7/7 here in the UK, or the Boston bombings, or Sandy Hook, or even the Germanwings plane crash, which happened earlier this year. Mm-hmm. Whenever there's a major event such as this, and it doesn't matter whether it was a hoax, because obviously a lot of these events that I've just mentioned were hoaxes in some way, or they were carried off using crisis actors. They didn't happen the way the official narrative tells you they did. But it doesn't matter, because it's the detail of what they're asking people to accept and what they're asking people to believe that's important.
It falls into that all the world is a stage kind of concept, right?
Yeah, it does. And when you really get into the research of all these things, you realize that so often there are crisis actors being used in events that are passed off as real news events. Mm-hmm. And there are imposters and doubles being used everywhere. And very little actually happens the way that the BBC Evening News or Fox News or CNN or whatever would have you believe, or the Wikipedia version of events, the official version of everything, you know. Mm. That there are always anomalies and discrepancies and things that don't add up. But as I say, it doesn't matter whether the event happened exactly as we're told it did. The important thing is that when you get a depiction of it via predictive programming, they're getting the public familiar with the scenario that they wish to roll out, and they're doing it on a subliminal level.
What are a few examples, Mark? That maybe one in music or something, or maybe in a movie?
Okay, well, the classic one that I always cite, because there's just so many examples to go through, is 9/11. And I mention in the book the fact that there are several hundred depictions of what was going to come to pass on September 11th, 2001 in a whole bunch of movies and cartoons before it. It was Independence Day, it was in The Matrix, it was in The Terminator, it was in The Simpsons cartoon, it was in Iron Man cartoon, it was in music videos, it was on record sleeves going back to the late 70s and all the way through the 80s. And you had things like, I'll mention the record sleeve because it's a fascinating one. There was a record by Supertramp, the British rock group, that came out in 1979, and it's called Breakfast in America. And on the sleeve, you've got a view out of an airplane window coming in over Manhattan. And you've got the Statue of Liberty, which has been changed so that it appears as a waitress in a cafe. And then you've got the Manhattan skyline in the background with the Twin Towers, and you've got the word Supertramp above the skyline. And somebody worked out, I don't know how, but they worked out that if you make a mirror image of it, so you reverse it, where the lettering appears above the Twin Towers over the Manhattan skyline, what did spell out a couple of letters of Supertramp now says 9/11. You've got the 9 above one tower and the 11 above another. And bear in mind that this is a view from an aeroplane window coming in over Manhattan. And that was some predictive programming related to 9/11 some 30 years before it actually came to pass. So there was obviously advanced knowledge of 9/11 going back decades. And a lot of researchers believe that the Twin Towers were actually constructed with the specific purpose of them being brought down 35 years later. The entire purpose of them was this massive occult ritual that was 9/11. So you have that. I'll give you a music industry example. There was a video by Lil Wayne, the rapper, allegedly. And the track was called My Home Is Still. It came out in 2012, I believe it was. And there's a split-second scene where you see Lil Wayne in a movie theater surrounded by 12 skeletons. And this video dropped just a few days before a lone nutter, we're told, went on the rampage in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, and killed 12 people. So there you have Lil Wayne with 12 skeletons in a movie theater, kind of foreshadowing what was to come a few days later. Again, doesn't matter whether it was a hoax or not, that is the version that they want the public to get familiar with. And I came to realize that there are three main reasons why predictive programming is used. One of them is to prepare the public and get them familiar with this particular scenario so that when the event goes off and they hear about it on the news, because it's been absorbed by the subconscious mind, there's no kind of rational, logical processing of thought going on here. It's just the symbolism involved in the event has lodged itself in the subconscious mind. So the familiarity is there. So you hear the newsreader telling you what's going on. And deep in the recesses of your subconscious mind, there's a little voice going, I know about this. I've heard about this. This feels familiar to me. And so the official narrative is more readily accepted. Then the second reason that's given for why predictive programming is used is that there's a kind of energetic empowerment that goes towards the event that they want to carry off. So when you put it into a Hollywood movie that's watched by millions of people around the world and they see that split-second image, again, it's going into the subconscious mind. There's no logical processing of it happening in the conscious mind. But because people are seeing this image and they're connecting with it, they're giving their energy to it, their life force energy, unbeknown to them. And large numbers of people all pooling their energy and sending it in the same direction actually helps to empower this event into physical manifestation, because everything in its base form is energy. As we know, it's all frequency and vibration, and all this stuff is happening on an unseen level. So that's another explanation for it, and I think there's validity to that one as well. But the third explanation as to what is going on is, for me, the most relevant and the most potent one. And this is where I came into the understanding of how free will consciousness enters the scenario. And I came to realize that as humans, we are unique among sentient beings in being gifted with free will consciousness, the ability to make moral choices for ourselves. And this is where it connects with natural law and consequentialism, because you reap the karmic consequences of the choices that you choose to make. And this happens on both an individual level and a collective level. So you can make individual choices in your own life, and you will see things play out in your life that have a direct bearing on the choices that you made. And it was all down to you. Nobody forced you to make those choices. You could have gone one way, you could have gone the other. You made your choice, and you reap the consequences from it. It happens on a collective level as well, and we're all bound by this. Large numbers of people all choosing to go in a particular direction will have a bearing on the collective experience that we all undergo. And you can look around in the world today and you can see all the chaos and all the slavery and all the violence and all the immorality and the injustice that we have. And you can say to yourself that this is all as a result of the choices that humanity has collectively made. If you make choices that are not rooted in morality and are not rooted in an understanding of natural law, then you can expect all the chaos and the madness and the insanity that ensues. And that's the kind of reality that we currently have. That's what we're living in, because people haven't learnt their lesson and they've not taken the time and trouble to understand how natural law impacts on their lives. And people are just not living moral lives. They're not making moral choices. That's why we've got what we've got, and it won't change until people change on a collective basis. So just taking it back to the predictive programming, we have this ability to make free will choices. And within that, we have the ability to consent to things, to choose whether we will accept something or to choose whether it's unacceptable to us and we're not having it. And I believe that what the elite controllers are doing when they place depictions of these events that they plan to bring off is giving us a little sneak preview of it and letting us know what they plan to do. They're voicing their intentions. Of course, they're doing it in encoded ways. They're being very sly and deceptive about it, because nobody could reasonably be expected to see a Little Wayne video with 12 skeletons in a movie theatre and say to themselves, I understand what's going on here. I know now that they plan to pull off this shooting in a movie theatre in a few days and say that all these people have died, and they're going to use it as an excuse to try and take the guns back from the people of America. And, you know, I'm not with that at all. I completely object to this. How can anyone be expected to come to that understanding of that
Right.
image in a video? And yet they still seem to think that by giving us a little depiction of what they plan to do, when we don't object to it, when we don't say that we're not consenting to it, it gives them a green light to go right ahead and do what they always plan to do. And I do feel that they think this lets them off the hook in terms of the karmic consequence that would ordinarily bear down on them. They think that because they put the emphasis on us, by letting us know what's going on, when we give our tacit approval to it by our silence, by not objecting to it, we have taken the sort of karmic consequences on ourselves and we've relieved them of it.
Do you think, just real quick here, to bring it up to current events in a way, with all this Confederate flag stuff, you see how that's been part of American history for a few hundred years, and nobody really gave two shits about that. But you take one event and you throw what do they say, fuel on that fire. Everybody's pointing, look, the flag, he had a flag, the Confederate flag, that's the problem, and all of a sudden everybody and their mother wants to get this damn flag banned and illegal or whatever. And now they have everybody up in an uproar where now the Confederate flag, it's being, taken off shelves and it's being hard to find and all this stuff. But yet now if we apply that to the same, what you're talking about, we see movies like The Kingsman, right?
Exactly.
We see something like that, or TV shows or something where they show shootings in a church, or rap songs talking about killing people, all this stuff. And instead of people banning that, saying, hey, that's a disgrace, that's disrespecting human life, we don't want that, take that off we don't want that aired or shown, what do people do? They keep buying it. They go to it. It's, more attention to it. And that's kind of, so the ones putting that out are saying, well, look, the people aren't complaining or asking us to ban these movies, music, or TV shows. I guess they want this type of energy put out there. Okay, here you go. Does that kind of make sense? How they have humanity that twisted, that they argue about the unimportant stuff, or and then when they see what they portray as life imitating art and art imitating life, they're like, hey, yeah, that's cool. We can see that. We'll have more of that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's incredible to me how people just fall hook, line, and sinker for their tricks still. It's just so depressing. When you understand the methods that they use, when you've taken the time and trouble to study it, every time they pull one of these off and every time they roll out another predictive programming example, you see the exact reaction that they clearly wanted from people coming exactly on script. And you just think to yourself, my God, it's so easy to manipulate people. They've got it down to a fine art, and people just do not seem to learn. Yep. There is a lot of awareness of the fact that predictive programming is used now. More and more people are coming to that understanding, because every time there is a major world event, you can now find a work of fiction that foreshadowed it in some way. Of course, the problem is you have to wait for the real world event to go off in order to be able to identify what the predictive programming portrayal of it was, because you don't know before that.
And we're bombarded with it. We're bombarded with it. How many TV shows and movies in the last 5 to 10 years have shown apocalypse or we know apocalypse is a great revealing, but end of times, the end of the world, zombie stuff, destruction, futures. Yes, all these Mad Max kind of future kind of stuff. They keep showing that
games, all of that.
Yeah.
And every time there is one of these things, you can then go back and realize where the predictive programming element was. So people have probably seen a movie this year or watched a TV program this year that has contained some kind of subliminal reference aimed at their subconscious mind for something which is yet to be rolled out. And you mentioned the Kingsmen movie. There's a portrayal there of Colin Firth's character in a mind-controlled state who goes into this church and just absolutely slaughters the entire congregation. And it's kind of presented in a comedic kind of way. It's supposed to be kind of amusing, and there's heavy CGI and there's comedy ways in which he's slicing people up and mutilating them, and there's nothing funny about it, of course, but that's the way it's portrayed in the movie. And isn't it interesting that occurred just a short while before we heard about this Charleston church shooting, the Dylan Roof event, and the attempts to demonize the Confederate flag, and another attempt at a gun grab and overthrowing the Second Amendment and all of that, And we had the Germanwings plane crash in March of this year. And then somebody realized that there was an Argentinian movie called Wild Tales, which had come out a short while before. And it was a series of 6 short stories. And in one of them, which again is presented in the form of a dark comedy, you've got this guy who is a pilot, and he decides to get revenge on various people that have wronged him in his life. And he tricks them all on board this flight. And I think it's his wife or his girlfriend has cheated on him, so he gets her on. And there's a business colleague that's stiffed him in a deal, so he manages to get him on. And he gets all these people on board that he's got a beef with. And during the flight, he manages to blockade himself into the cockpit, and he deliberately flies the plane into the ground to kill everyone on board, which of course mirrors the official narrative of the Germanwings plane crash, where we're told this Andreas Lubitz character, the co-pilot, engineered a way to blockade himself into the cockpit, and he flew his plane into the ground, killing everyone on board. So every time there's one of these events, you can point to a work of fiction where it's been presented to us. And I think they are hijacking our free will consciousness and our consent. They're doing it in a very sick, twisted way. Let's not forget, we're talking about mentally ill, demented psychopaths. These are the people that are running the world. They're not well. They're very, very ill. So we needn't expect them to do things in a fair way. We would expect everything they do to be sick and perverted and distorted, and so it is. But I really do believe that they feel they can escape karmic consequence and get themselves off the hook by shifting that burden of consent over to us. They understand free will consciousness and consent and natural law very well. And so we need to as well, because it's being used against us. And until we can understand how it all works, we don't stand a chance of overthrowing it. And it was understanding how all this stuff works that during the process of writing my book just shone a new kind of light on everything. And it explains why they do things like place all this dark occultic imagery, all this Illuminati symbolism into videos, why there's pyramids everywhere and all-seeing eyes everywhere, and Baphomet horned hand signs being thrown up all over the place, and why they put mind control symbolism into videos and stuff. So you're watching a Katy Perry video or Britney Spears or something, and you've got all these images of teddy bears and shattered mirrors and dolls with mutilated limbs. These are all symbols that hint at trauma-based mind control and particularly monarch programming. And the reason they put them into videos and stage shows and stuff and record sleeves is they're letting you know what's happening. They're basically telling you that this artist is a mind-controlled puppet, and they're giving you the opportunity to kind of object to it. But because most people don't understand how to interpret the symbolism, because they've not had it explained to them, then it just goes completely over their heads. And they're giving their energy and their consent to it in a very underhand way, and they don't even understand it's happening. So one of the intentions with my book has been to really break down how all this stuff is done and what this symbolism means, and the understanding that I've come to of how free will consciousness ties into it has been quite a revelation to me in showing how all this stuff fits together. And I think it's a story that's not been told before in this detail. You have lots of YouTube video makers, and you have lots of bloggers and lots of authors that have gone into detail in terms of mind control symbolism and all the dark occult symbols that are going into videos and stuff, and they can tell you what they are and where they originate from and all the background to it. But you very rarely get the why. They very rarely are able to explain exactly why they're doing this, why it's so important to them. And I really hope that I can bring all this stuff together and give a kind of complete picture as to the nuts and bolts of what's going on, but crucially, why it's being done.
Well, I think, yeah, you stand in a perfect position being a DJ all your life, pretty much. You finally started asking, what am I communicating here? For a long time, you just played the music. This sounds good. Okay, fine. But then it came to a point that you were like, wait, what am I playing? What are they saying? What am I conveying to people? What's the general public getting through me? What am I a part of? And that now you're on the other side of it, that you're like, whoa,
That's it. Yeah. And I can look back now with the benefit of hindsight and maturity and having done a lot of research. I can look back at a lot of the music that I used to play in the 90s and going into the 2000s. And it's so clear to see what the agenda was. It's so clear to see why the music was changing in certain ways, why certain lyrical content was being ushered in to all the hip-hop tracks of that time, why certain production methods were being employed. When you understand what the game plan is, it's so clear to see it, but I couldn't see it at the time. I didn't have a clue. I was just a good, loyal, faithful DJ serving the industry as much as I was serving the punters in the clubs. I was taking music from all the record companies and the promo companies and obediently playing it on the radio and playing it out at gigs just the way DJs were expected to. And I was helping to put this music out there, and I was helping to promote certain artists. And I can look back at it now and think, my God, I was a part of this and I didn't even understand. The mind control runs very deep. Until you can break the spell, until you can break free of the brainwashing, then you're very much held in all of that. You need it broken down. You need it explained to you. You need to have it communicated in a very easily understandable, easily digestible way. And so that's what I'm trying to do now. Now that I know better, I'm trying to put it all into very easily understandable formats so that other people stand a chance of coming to the same realizations and seeing what the music is being used for.
Yes.
Because, I mean, hip hop has changed, man. It's changed so much. I started out as a DJ 25 years ago, 1990, and the hip hop output of the time compared with what is getting put out there in 2015, I mean, it's just like two different worlds. There's no connection at all. All the roots have been lost. The original essence of the art form has been lost. Hip hop, so-called, I can't even think of it as hip hop, has just been completely corrupted, completely debased, completely taken over by the corporations and bastardized and watered down and just made insidious and negative and subversive, and it's just horrific now. It's just a tragedy what it's become.
Yeah, well, the last my last podcast, I had Lennon Honor on, and I had him on because he's recently working on a documentary film where he's touching on a critical analysis of NWA and their albums and their recent biopic, Straight Outta Compton. And
right.
He did a critical analysis of just what you're talking about, how back in the day, I mean, those beats sounded good, they were rhyming good, like, wow, this is cool, yeah, this is it, this is the shit. But now when you actually pay attention what's going on, and it's astonishing. He breaks down the number of times like they use the word fuck, the amount of times they use, shit, how many times they degrade women, sexist terms, all this kind of stuff, and it's in the hundreds, and that's just in 4 albums that these guys released, and altogether those 4 albums only ran 3 hours. 4 albums, 3 hours and 9 minutes. There was like 500 plus times where they degraded women. So that's just listening to each album one time through. Imagine all the times people listened to those songs and had a subconscious implant of, they even came out with a song called "Bitch is a Bitch" or something like that, right?
Bitches ain't shit.
Bitches ain't shit. So look at that. So that's part of all that program. And then even to this day, a few months ago, I sent you a cover for Muse. They released a new album called Drones, and on that cover, it explains perfectly what's actually going on. The elite don't have to do anything anymore. Now we do it to ourselves. That cover of Drones, it showed like soldiers or military people with joysticks on their heads on a screen, and that we see that as from the point of view of another soldier that's sitting at a control terminal with his hand on a joystick, but his head is a joystick, and we see another hand with what appears to be a business suit, attached to it, controlling his head, his joystick head. So that implies right there, showing that we're being controlled. People are the drones, and the ones controlling the drones are other people. So we're all doing it to ourselves. We're all doing it to each other because we don't critically analyze what we're doing, what we're saying, what we're transmitting, what we're partaking in. And this goes perfectly in line with what happened to you. You were a drone. You had no idea what you were doing, putting it out there, fine, until you woke up, and now you're like, whoa, and that's part of the diagnosis, right? You got to diagnose what the situation is, what's going on, why is it going on, and then we can start addressing the solutions.
I remember just after I woke up, very early on, probably 2010, I was looking at a blog post, and the writer was talking about the fact that the biggest enemy that conscious individuals have is those that have not yet woken up. The drones. Yes. He was calling them human drones.
Yes.
So I don't know what the statistics are, in terms of the percentage of the global population that has kind of consciously awoken or evolved in any way. Maybe it's 10% versus 90. Maybe I'm being far too generous there. We're obviously in a very serious minority. But the writer was just putting forward the view that the greatest challenge that those who have taken the responsibility to wake up to truth face doesn't actually come from the elite controllers. It comes from the manipulated drones that make up the rest of the population, because until vast numbers of these people can wake up and can get on the side of those of us that actually care about what's happening to humanity, then nothing's going to improve. So they're the real enemy. And I thought that's a really interesting way of looking at it, human drones. And talking about NWA and gangster rap, so-called, that genre, back in the 90s, you would have found me, along with all the other drones, if you like, absolutely defending this stuff. I was a big fan of hip-hop. What appealed to me about it was the fact that it was controversial, it was dangerous, it was anti-establishment. There was something about all of that that kind of drew me to it, because I've always enjoyed standing apart from the crowd, I suppose. I've never really been someone that goes along with fashions and trends. I've always enjoyed staying outside of that. And so something about hip hop appealed to me because it was kind of subversive in that way and, you know, anti-establishment. And so you would have found me defending all this stuff, and I would have said, it's just these artists expressing themselves. They're talking about where they come from. It's the ghetto lifestyle. It's their backgrounds. They're talking about what they know about. It's just kind of a documentary. Hip hop is like a documentary of what goes on the street. And people don't like it because they're not familiar with that way of living. So they find it intimidating. But that's what it is. It's these artists just putting truth out there. And, you know, to a certain extent, there is still some truth in that. And obviously, that's one of the original foundations of the hip hop art form. It was all about talking about the experience of these people and where they come from. But it's pretty obvious to me now that the whole genre of gangster rap and acts such as NWA and individuals such as Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, and a whole world of others, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, 50 Cent, all these artists were part of an engineered agenda at the hands of the corporations, and they were being deliberately steered down this path, and they were being deliberately required to put out this sort of output in order to have social engineering effects and mind controlling effects on a massive basis. I can see that now, but back then I would have defended it. So I can absolutely understand why people still do defend the sort of stuff that is getting put forward by hip hop, because the mind control runs very deep. It's the same thing as when you start talking about the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, and you make any kind of suggestion that these acts may have been the product of something like the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, and that they were created with the specific purpose of mind controlling a whole generation. Or you get into the Laurel Canyon artists and the counterculture hippie kind of era at the tail end of the 60s, and you suggest in any way that that may have been manipulated as well, given that there are military intelligence backgrounds involved with the families of many of these prominent artists. Many original generation fans that were around in the 60s just won't be having it. You know, it's sacrilege to them that you could dare to desecrate the memory of the Beatles by suggesting this. Because
right. Hey, you know what? Let me interject something here. As I'm hearing you speak right now, the last like 2-3 minutes that you've been talking, I have this symbol in my head that fits perfectly with what you're talking about, and it never really made too much sense to me, except now it's become more clear. And I you know what? I have to thank Clint Richardson for this. I just saw some of the Free Your Mind 3 conference videos have been posted online. For now, they're on a pay service that you donate some money and whatnot. But I saw Clint Richardson's presentation, and he talked about, you remember a logo, a symbol we've all seen in research, we've come across this at one point or another, that snake that appears to be eating its tail, that it goes in a circle.
It's the Alfa Romeo logo, isn't it?
Is it? No, Alfa Romeo one, he's eating a human, isn't it?
Oh, sorry, the snake is eating a man in that one.
Right,
yeah,
the reptile is eating a man.
The snake eating its own tail. Yeah, I got you.
That's a logo we've seen in research, and it looks like it's a circle, it's eating itself or whatever. But what Clint Richardson pointed out was, well, maybe it's not eating itself, it's spewing its own self out. So it's a regurgitation. It's a cycle that it keeps creating itself.
Cyclical, isn't it?
Right. And so that as you were talking, I was thinking about this, that's what was done here with all these different genres of music, art, movies, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And in the general public, that all we needed was a kickstart. So we got the jump start. They planted the seeds, and we're off. So now we got rappers talking, putting out all this negative information. So that's the snake spewing out its own destruction. We got films that we think are so entertaining and enjoyable, but they're putting out the ideas and the mentality and the frame of thought, their energy for us to destroy ourselves. So it's a constant now that cycle. We're doing it ourselves, or the general public is doing it itself. So that's what I was visualizing as you were speaking, was that's where we're at right now. That as much as cyclical, we're the ones doing it to ourselves. As much as we might talk about freedom, change, and love and peace and all this stuff, but yet our actions are not in harmony with our thoughts and emotions. So we say one thing or think another thing, one thing, but our actions are totally against what we say.
That's right. And until we understand how those dynamics all work and how thoughts, emotions, and actions all have to be in balance and working together in unison, then don't expect anything to get better because it's being used against us. That's not to say we should give up and just reflect that everything is hopeless. Those of us that understand these things have to keep trying and have to keep making our contributions. But yeah, it's a problem right now. And they've used all these different generations of artists, of course, through the music industry, through the different ages. So in the 60s, the Beatles were playing their role, as were the Rolling Stones. It's no accident that they were the two biggest groups of the decade, because they were always intended to be. Why was it those two groups as opposed to any others? Because they were the two that were most with the agenda that was being rolled out at the time. And then over in the US, you had all the artists coming out of Laurel Canyon, as we've said, from the Doors to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young to Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Captain Beefheart, Buffalo Springfield, Joni Mitchell, all the rest of them.
Didn't it come out somewhere that even the Beatles, when they first landed in New York or something like that, the actual mobs weren't really organic, that they were a bunch of high school girls that were paid to be out there or something like that?
I think it was when they went to Japan, they hired a group of Japanese school kids to scream and go crazy, when in reality they had no clue who they were. And there have been multiple claims that when you saw girls screaming at early Beatles gigs, which started off the whole Beatlemania phenomenon, they were paid to do that. Wouldn't surprise me at all if that had been the case. So then you had those acts in the 60s, and then you had the likes of Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and all these kind of dark rock groups in the 70s. And then in the 80s, you had the emergence of artists like Madonna, who's been on an agenda since day one. And then in the 90s, it would have been the way they shaped and molded the hip-hop game gradually as that decade developed, or regressed, you might say. And then today you've got all these pop puppets like Katy Perry and Britney Spears and Rihanna and Beyonce and Miley Cyrus and all the rest of them. Nicki Minaj, Lil Wayne, Jay-Z has played a major role. In this chapter that I'm writing at the moment, I'm just in the midst of the one which I'm calling the systematic degeneration of hip-hop culture. I've started it with a couple of lyrics, and I've intended to show how the genre of hip-hop has been absolutely regressed and retarded from a once meaningful and potent art form into the turgid bucket of garbage that it now is. And I've started off with a lyric from 1993 from one of the biggest hip-hop records of that year. And you could have heard it in clubs all over the world. You would have heard it on radio stations, on hip-hop shows, on mix shows. You would have seen the video on MTV. It was KRS-One's Sound of the Police. And in 1993, it was a mainstream hip-hop record in that you would hear it everywhere. And I've included this lyric. It goes, "You're hot shot, want to get props and be a savior? First show a little respect in your behavior. Change your attitude, change your plan. There could never really be justice on stolen land. Are you ready for peace and equality? Because when my car is hooked up, you know you want to follow me. Your laws are minimal because you won't even think about looking at the real criminal." That is powerful stuff. That's KRS-One comparing modern police forces to African-American slavery in the US, and making the point that a police officer is merely a modern updating of the overseer from the slavery plantations. That's an incredible message in a record that was heard in clubs and lapped up by hip-hop fans everywhere in 1993.
Conscious lyrics.
Exactly. Then I take it forward 20 years to 2013. Again,
do I even want to hear this? Oh boy.
Oh, you do. You do, man. It's worth waiting for. Okay, so this was one of the biggest hip hop records of that particular year. And this one could be heard in clubs everywhere, heard on the radio, on hip hop shows, and, on MTV. And it's Big Sean featuring Nicki Minaj. And it's called Arse. So KRS-One's record was comparing modern policing with historic slavery. That was what the lyrics were all about. Big Sean's Arse is about a girl with a big arse. And I'll give you some lyrics. You ready?
Okay.
Arse, 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 arse. Arse, 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 arse. Arse, 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 arse. Stop. Now make that motherfucker hammer time like go stupid, go stupid, go stupid. A little bit more.
Oh,
Wobble-de wobble, wobble, wobbling. Arse so fat, all these bitches' pussies is throbbing. Bad bitches, I'm your leader. Phantom by the meter. Somebody point me to the best arse eater.
Wow.
Now, if those two lyrics, 20 years apart, do not demonstrate what has happened to this once meaningful and beautiful art form, then I don't know what more I can tell you. I think those two speak volumes.
Exactly. That's. But hey, we've evolved, Mark. We've evolved. It's 2015. We've evolved.
Well, people will say, oh, it's just as a result of market forces. It's just the way any genre goes over time. The music changes, nothing stays the same. And the corporations are only putting this stuff out because it makes them money. It's an easy way to profit. It's lowest common denominator music. It appeals to the widest demographic possible, and they just want to make money. That's all it is. But I've made another point in this chapter, and I've challenged anyone reading it to find me any hip-hop record. This is a mainstream hip-hop record, okay? Not underground. I'm talking about a record that would have been all over MTV, that would have been all over radio, that you would hear in every club that you go out to at the weekend, that deals with subject matter other than, okay? Anything other than having sex, partying in the club, throwing wads of cash in the air, girls with fat asses, a rapper's superior financial status over his or her peers, the possession of gold rims, chains, or other paraphernalia, the acquisition of high fashion clothing, alcohol, or jewelry brands, gun crime, selling large quantities of drugs, and having more sex. If anyone can find me a mainstream hip-hop record that deals with a subject other than those, I'd be very interested to know about it, because that is the message that is now being sent out by this genre. Those are the subjects that are getting propagated time and time again, and have been for pretty much the last 20 years, with pretty much no exceptions when it comes to music coming out of the major corporations that is aimed at the mainstream. Now that to me goes beyond chance and goes beyond accident. That to me is evidence of a systematic agenda to make the people that listen to this music, as well as the people that create it, the artists that are paraded as the public face of it, just stupid and ignorant and morally debased and degraded. And I think that has been the intention with hip-hop output over the last several years. It's taking things to new levels of ignorance and debasement in terms of the stuff that's getting put out there now.
New lows, literally.
Well, yeah. And that lyric that I gave you from the Big Sean track from Nicki Minaj, that is nothing unusual. Don't think that's some extreme example that I've just plucked out. Most hip-hop records now, so-called, from the likes of Nicki Minaj, Lil Wayne, Big Sean, Drake, Rick Ross, 2 Chainz, all these clowns, is going to include lyrical content like that. Nigger this, bitch that, pussy this,
Anaconda, writing Anaconda. Yeah.
Well, Anaconda is about big dicks, basically. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's the tune. Mm-hmm. And that's what kids are into. That's what 12, 13-year-old girls are singing the lyrics to Nicki Minaj tracks, because Nicki Minaj is a hero to them because of the way she's been marketed.
Wasn't she
Rihanna.
one of the Teen Choice Awards or something like that recently?
Yeah, I've mentioned that. The BBC over here, BBC Radio 1, had their Teen Awards last year. And the background music to the radio ad was Nicki Minaj's Anaconda.
Huh.
She's talking about, I can't remember the lyric, but this dude named Michael had a dick bigger than the Eiffel Tower and put me to sleep and all this sort of stuff. And Nicki Minaj was one of the artists that could have been voted for as Artist of the Year, you know. And this is Teen Awards, starting from the age of 13. So they're actually encouraging kids of the age of 13 and upwards to listen to this stuff. And they're saying, hey, isn't Nicki Minaj great? This is your generation. This is your era. And I think young people right now in 2015 have every right to feel very shortchanged and very hard done by when the artists they're given to look up to define their generation are Rick Ross, Drake, Lil Wayne, Nicki Minaj, Rihanna, Miley Cyrus, and all the rest of them. What a tragic state of affairs. What happened?
Yeah. Oh my
What
goodness. That's this is all in the music arena. This is part of that deliberate dumbing down, not only of America, but the world. And it's not in the education system, you know, so the education system, music, entertainment. I mean, just, oh, wow. Even the sports. What do we see in sports? I mean, there's not too many athletic guys who watch sports. It's a lot of the beer guzzling, you know, fat guys sitting on the couches because they can't do it watching the athletic guys.
And they're always the ones that buy the tracksuits and the sneakers, you know, all the sportswear, the sports caps.
Yeah, the jerseys, the team
Damn bit of
jerseys.
sport in their lives.
Yes. Wow.
Hilarious. Take all the sports drinks, you know, all that Lucozade energy drinks, and they just sit there on the couch.
Yep. Man.